Welcome to Better Podcasting, a show where we talk about podcast tips, tools, and best practices to help you succeed with your podcast. What makes us different? Well, just like you, we podcast purely out of the love and fun of it. Podcasting is our hobby, and we recognize that it's yours too. We always encourage your questions and feedback, and you can find all of our contact information at betterpodcasting.com. Here's your hosts for the show, Stephen John Drew and Stargate Pioneer.
Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Better Podcasting. My name's Stephen John Drew, and with me today, of course, is my co-host, Stargate Pioneer. What's up, SP?
Just riding the second seat and waiting to get this party started.
Is it a party?
It's always a party on the Better Podcasting podcast.
That's hard to say, isn't it?
I know. It's like Better Podcasting podcast. Okay.
We should have thought of that when we named it, but you know, oh well. We're terrible
it's just
people.
Better. I think the name's better. I like it. Let's do it.
I agree. So are we going to hyphenate it? The Better Podcasting dash podcast? Is that where we're going?
No, it's the Better Podcasting space podcast.
Okay. Gotcha. Dot podcast? Wait, does that exist? I hope it does.
.com.
Today, we are continuing our several-part series. If you have not listened to any of the past episodes, what we're currently doing is an initial arc with our podcast here, talking about the basics and the foundation of starting up your podcast. Each episode, we're going through section by section, dissecting things quite a bit and talking about the subject at hand. And today we're going to be talking about how to host your podcast and what to do with it once you've posted. So there is a variety of things that we will cover. And as usual, we always encourage your feedback. So please go to betterpodcasting.com. You can find all of our different contact information methods there, and just get in touch with us and let us know what you think of the show, whether or not you have questions about the topic. Maybe you have questions that we can answer, and we'll slide those in somewhere along the way as well. Right, SP?
Absolutely. We would love to hear from you about what you think about podcasting, and if you have any questions, of course. But today, we're going to be talking about the most asked question that non-podcasters actually ask. You know what that is, Stephen?
No, I don't.
It's, how do I get my podcast in iTunes?
Yes, that is a very, very good question. And the way that you do it is you call up Tim Cook. Sorry, I couldn't remember his name. You call up Tim Cook. You tell him, hey, I got a podcast. Stephen John Drew sent me. And then when you get out of jail, what you can do is listen to the rest of the show and we'll tell you the exact method. So go ahead, SP.
Yeah, so actually you don't submit your podcast to iTunes like the actual file, right? You actually have it hosted somewhere else in a media host, whether that's another company, whether that's another company or whether that is an actual website that you have with storage on it, that sort of thing. But it is a place to host your file. You've recorded it. You've got great an intro, great audio, great music in there, and you got all the great content, and you got this great MP3 file, and you have to place it somewhere in order for other people to download it. And if your goal is to get great distribution, iTunes is definitely the first one that a lot of people think of. It is not by far the only one anymore, and we'll get into that in a second. But you have to figure out how to do that. And that is normally done. One of the definitions of a podcast that a lot of people say is it has to be able to use an RSS feed. What's that? Well, you don't really need to know, although we can tell you. What you really need to know is that you need to place it somewhere where you can put an RSS feed that points to the files.
Yes.
Now, you can self-host, and if your downloads are low enough, if you have a good enough self-hosting plan with a shared server or whatever, you can get away with that. And Stephen, you've done that, right?
Right. So just to back it up here really quick, what an RSS does is essentially it is a file that tells a piece of software how technically to download your files. So it organizes it. It's something that it's a standard sort of way of inputting the data into these different readers. So iTunes is definitely one of the readers of podcast RSS feeds. There are a variety of other ones as well, but they all operate off that RSS feed. And yes, talking shared hosting. Now, basically what you've got is your two options. Number one, which is the shared hosting, where essentially you're going to go ahead and manage all of the back end as far as putting together your RSS feed, the method you do that, actually keeping the files on your server space, things like that. That's something that you're the one that does that. The other option is to use what's called a podcasting service, a hosting service, and there's a variety of those, and a lot of that is all automated because it's a company that sells you space and, of course, sells you the ability to easily host these files and easily generate an RSS feed. There are two different methods. Me personally, yes, I have a lot of experience with shared hosting, but I will tell you it comes with a mixed bag of pros and cons.
I love to go use these companies out there, and we'll get to their names in a second, but I love to use them because they take care of everything. They take care of the RSS feed. I don't ever have to manage that. They take care of the storage of the files. If I ever have to replace a file, I can just upload it to the one I use, and it's great. I love it, and it actually spins it out to all the different destinations. You can use your RSS feed to spin it out, or else you can use different paths to spin it out as well. And we'll get to that in a second. I keep on saying that. We'll get to that in a second. But basically, these companies are my preferred method. And if you're a new podcaster that doesn't know a thing about web management, you don't know a lot about backend or shared hosting or anything like that, don't worry. You don't need to do it. Just get a hold of one of these companies and you will do great. Now, the first one I will pop in and just say I use Libsyn for all of my podcasts right now. Libsyn is my primary host. So it's spelled Libsyn, and it's short for Liberated Syndication. They have great service. They have great capabilities. They're hardly ever down. They've been in business since 2004. You do pay a little bit of a premium, and it's not name brand premium. It's reliability premium, it's functionality premium, and it's capability premium. So they have different plans. For a weekly podcast about the length that we do, I use a $20 a month plan, and I get phenomenal stats with that. And I'm a stats junkie. I like the math, I like the stats, and I geek out about it. So I use Libsyn, but they're not the only game in town. There's another recommended host out there that a lot of people will tell you, and its name is Blueberry. And it is another great host, a little bit different stats, a little bit different way to manage the podcast behind the door, if you will, the electronic door. And it's one that I want to test out. So I know a lot of people recommend it. I trust these people when they recommend them. And Blueberry, it's without the vowels in the berry, right? So it's BLUBRRY. So just look that up or look Libsyn up, and you can compare and contrast. Personally, I like Libsyn, but I will try out Blueberry at some point in time as well. So those are the two, like, ironclad. You can't go wrong with either of these. But there's others, aren't there, Stephen?
Yes, there are. And if you're familiar with the fellow host of SPN Mine on the Gonna Geek podcast, Chris Farrell, he uses one that's called Podbean. Now, Podbean is a little bit different. Honestly, since their inception, they have had a bit of a rocky road. I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago, they switched to different data center, and it's been a lot more stable since. Back in their early days, there was some stability issues, but since it has been a lot more stable. But one thing that if you are a stats junkie like SP, I will tell you that my experience seeing the two of the platforms, Libsyn gives you a little bit better stats, a little more accurate to some degree. I should say some ways. And honestly, the stats are just a heck of a lot easier to really dive in and get the full detailed information about your podcast. Now, I will say on the other hand, Podbean is actually a little bit easier to post to than Libsyn. There's a lot of different options with Libsyn. We use Libsyn for this podcast, But Podbean is a little more straightforward as far as going in and adding a file. So they both have their pros, they both have their cons. Podbean, it's not as big as Libsyn, I don't believe, but still a lot of really, really good services available, and they're a little bit cheaper too.
Yeah, I like their price point, and for a hobby podcaster, you can't go wrong with Podbean. Their downloads are a little bit slower, and the reliability, while has been good since they switched data centers, I have noticed a couple of fellow podcasters that have issues with Podbean from time to time over the last couple of years. But for what you use it for and for the price, it's a great option, and I would recommend at least you check it out. Absolutely. Now, the next three or so that we're going to talk about, both Stephen and I have used for the last, year, I guess, or so. And some we just can't recommend, and some we can. And one that I cannot recommend right now because of pending legal problems, because of tricks of the system that people use to artificially inflate their numbers, because of a lot of things, it's SoundCloud. Now, I know a lot of people like SoundCloud, and you're like, SP, you're wrong. Well, you're right on that a lot of times, but in this case, I'm not, because I don't know how long SoundCloud's going to be in business. They're being sued because there was no way for SoundCloud to really wrangle in the music rights, so they were allowing people to post a lot of stuff, and if they ever can come out of this, they might be a strong company, but if you're just starting your podcast out right now, you don't want to start off on shaky ground. So in my opinion, SoundCloud is not where you want to start out with. Go ahead and do your own investigation if you want, but I can't recommend SoundCloud.
I agree. And I want to say SoundCloud has its own unique purpose. It is something that one of the local radio stations that I listen to, they use it a lot for posting clips from their shows. If there's a funny caller or something like that, maybe an interview, they post it on there, and it works really, really darn well for that sort of stuff. However, for podcasting, I just don't feel that it is up to snuff for my recommendation, which is why I'm with SP on this. I also cannot recommend it as a service. I would highly suggest you look at Libsyn and Podbean before SoundCloud.
Right, and Blueberry too. I'll throw that in there.
Yeah.
Now, there's another secondary, I will call it a secondary host, and we actually use it for better podcasting. You might be listening to it right now. It's Spreaker, and I like Spreaker because its ability to stream live, and you can hold up to either, depending on your plan, you can hold up to 100 hours for, I believe it's the $5 a month plan, or 500 hours at the $20 a month plan, which is great. You can even put multiple podcasts right on there. Right now, I think I have 6 different podcasts on 6 different feeds on my $120 a month plan. The problem is, at some point in time, I'm going to get to their 500-hour cap, and I'm going to have to start deleting some of the back end of the content in order to open up space for new podcasts. That'll happen in a couple of years. It's going to take a couple of years to get there. I will get there. I'm at 20 some odd % right now, just with my back catalog that I've thrown on there this year. So, but besides that, we use it for streaming on Gonna Geek. I use it for Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Starling Tribune. It's all live streaming. When we live stream this show, it will go on Spreaker as well. So it's phenomenal capability. And they just a couple weeks ago updated the interface. So there's a whole recording suite to that, and you can plug in multiple USB microphones into their interface, which is something that's hard to do because generally your computer only wants to listen as it's recording in whatever recording software you have to one USB device. So I think you can put in up to 3 USB devices. So if you have 3 ATR 2100s or your 3 AT 2005s, you can plug them in USB and have 3 different co-hosts in the room, and that's great. And then they have the ability to interface with Skype now and a lot of things. So I can't say enough about Spreaker. It is expensive for what you get.
Yes,
the stats are not all that great, and I would not trust them for a long-term RSS feed because it's not a permanent solution to store your podcast. Libsyn, Blueberry, Podbean, it's on once you get through that month, at least for Libsyn, and I think it's the same way with Blueberry, you have unlimited back catalog. It archives it and it's there forever. With Podbean, it's unlimited. From what we hear, you can upload an unlimited amount every month, but with Spreaker, you get 100 hours or 500 hours, and that's it.
Yeah. I have to say that Spreaker is something that, in my experience, I really recommend checking it out if you are doing a live stream and you're looking for a live stream delivery service. However, for podcasting, it is again one that I can't recommend over the other couple options. I just don't see it for podcast file hosting, and that's something that, there are people that do it, and everybody's entitled to their own opinion. But we're here with Better Podcasting to give you the advice that that we feel is the best way to shape your podcast. And so at this time, it's not something that SP or I could really recommend as your main file host for podcasting.
Right. It is a secondary capability. I use it for the live streaming and host the live podcast afterwards, so people can go and hear it. So that's all good there. Now, there's one other one that I want to bring up, and it's one that both Stephen and I have tried. It's called Mixcloud. And there are some people that have success with Mixcloud, and it has a wonderful built-in player. I have seen it. I have used it, and it sounds great. And unfortunately, not unfortunately, it is free, but unfortunately, we didn't get a lot of traction using it at all. There's not the user base going back and forth like there is with Spreaker, and it's just one of those things that I would not recommend. Now, why will I not recommend a free host? Well, because of free, right?
Yeah.
And you never know, they got to be making money somewhere, right? Yeah. Those servers that have your information on it have to be paid by someone. And when the money runs out, I don't know what's going to happen to them. So again, for stability's sake, I would say go for one of the other ones that we have recommended.
Agreed. And Mixcloud's one that I've actually had some experience with over the last, I think it's like 5 years. And I've both times that I've really given it a big push, I've seen the same sort of thing that you mentioned, which is just not a lot of traffic. Now, traffic is something that you may want to consider if you've got a budget for your file hosting, and which you should do. You should have a bit of a budget for it. And you find that with a service you choose to use as your primary, maybe have some stuff left over, you might be worth taking a look to see if you can afford a second one. Now, you want to be careful because you don't want to go ahead and essentially hurt yourself by making yourself not really searchable because you're out there in too many different places. But that is something that what you might find is, for example, Spreaker has a unique base that while we don't get the majority of our traffic on our podcast to Spreaker, we do get extra hits and extra traffic through that. So that's potential discovery. So sometimes by carefully picking a couple different services and having yourself available through a couple different places, you might find an audience that you wouldn't by just choosing one specific location.
Right. And by talking about that discoverability, I want to bring up one more thing about these hosting companies. They all have apps on multiple devices, right? So people can go to the Libsyn app or the Spreaker app, and they can search for podcasts that are on that app, and as well as the directory services that we'll get to in a second. But if you're talking about discoverability and you want to create your own app and you don't know anything about web coding, Libsyn will do it for you. Spreaker will do it for you. There is a charge for it. It could be, if you want it on all devices, it could be as much as $300 a year. Yes, I know that's a lot of money. You don't have to do this, but it does enhance searchability and discoverability, which is discoverability. There's that word again. You will hear it often. Do we have a discoverability problem? No, you just create good content. Then you will be discovered. Trust me. But in the meantime, if you want that extra discoverability, those hosts, most of those hosts have that options. Yeah. And we'll get into that in a later podcast. I don't want to hit that point too much over the head right now, but that is something to look forward to as you're searching for these hosts companies, media host companies. That's something that you should look into. Now, when you're starting your podcast, Stephen, is a media host the only thing that you think you need?
No, one of the biggest things, and I kind of flubbed over it earlier because I didn't want to jump into the point, is you really should consider getting yourself an actual website, because what you want to do is have a go-to place that people can find you, and search engine optimization is a very, very tricky thing. And where I was going earlier with my point is that you don't want to split yourself so that when you put in your podcast name, you find 6 different places to find you, and that your users end up split a bunch of different ways and they don't know how exactly to find you. If you make yourself an actual website, what you will find is that if you tailor it right and you link sort of back to that website from your other locations, it will become the top result. And you can also in your podcast promote that website. So for us, we say betterpodcasting.com. Then you can go there and you can find all of the different ways. As we progress and we end up doing live, we'll end up with a link to the live account. We'll end up putting on there our Spreaker page. We'll put, you can see right now, there's a link to the RSS. There are quick hot links to subscribe by iTunes or by RSS. There's a whole bunch of different things right there that you find the main ways to reach us. And we're going to continue promoting that. If we simply had our Libsyn page and then our Spreaker page and then a bunch of other things, you go in and you type in Better Podcasting, you're not going to really know which is the right place to find all of our different location or all of our different information, and you might find yourself only getting part of what's available. So having a website can be very, very important, and also, like I said, really help with SEO.
Yep. And I have a cheap way to start out by doing it. You don't have to code your own website and have your own WordPress site and everything, although that is probably where we're going to recommend, but you don't have to do that right away. But you do need to buy that URL. So if you go to hover.com or GoDaddy.com or any other places where you can actually buy a URL, and what's a URL? That's the web address. For this podcast, it's betterpodcasting.com. And then point it towards whatever web page that maybe your hosting company has. I'll give you an example. Voices of Defiance. When I started Voices of Defiance, I bought voicesofdefiance.com. And I also started a Libsyn account with Voices of Defiance. Libsyn actually gives you a web page that you can have. It's not really great, but it is at least a face to your podcast, right? So I pointed Voices of Defiance towards that page. Then later, when I did get a website, I took that pointer in, I believe it was GoDaddy, and then pointed it at the Voices of Defiance website. So right now it's pointed there. Now, Voices of Defiance recently completed. It is going to be no more. And as of this podcast, a couple of weeks before they actually tore down the sets. So there's no way we're going to get any more Defiance. And if we do, it'll be a onesie, one-off or whatever. And I have to get together with Sean and Shannon and do a podcast about it. So what happens now? Well, Voices of Defiance became part of the GonnaGeek.com network. So that is where I am going to take that voicesofdefiance.com and I'm going to point it to that network page. And so that's an evolution of what you can do with the URL. Do you need a web page that you actually have WordPress and everything? Well, no, you don't. It's good, but you don't need it. Can you do without it? Yeah, you can do without it doing exactly what I said. So there you go.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the biggest reasons to get yourself a .com and promote it, because you may evolve in the future to somewhere else. And let's say that all of these episodes, SP is going, you should go and check out voicesofdefiance.libsyn.com or whatever it is. And is that what it is? Okay, that's what it is. And he's doing that over and over and over and over. And then 3 years later, he switches to Podbean for some reason. All of that back catalog is going to send it to a non-existing URL, as opposed to check out voicesofdefiance.com. You know, he can hold on to that domain pretty much for all of eternity as long as he wants to pay for it. And then that back catalog will still point to the right location because he can just redirect the .com. And I want people to know this. .coms are not intimidating. My personal recommendation is Hover because it is very straightforward. GoDaddy is another one that I use. Both are pretty mainstream services, but there are a variety of different ways that you can get a .com. If you are getting yourself a hosting site, sometimes they include the .com. I personally recommend against that because sometimes it can be a problem if you switch hosting providers. So I usually recommend registering it separately. But at the end of the day, find yourself a .com that you'll be able to control, because then if you do switch services, your back catalog will refer to the right location.
Right. And this is a subject that it's very complex. We'll get into it a little bit more in depth later, not in this podcast, but in other podcasts. Just know that snatching up a URL, and it's not that expensive. Most of the URLs I have bought in the last year or so have been like $12 or whatever for a year. It's not that expensive, guys, and it protects your brand. So if you think you've got gold, right? If you think that 5 years from now, you're going to be making $100,000 a month on your, IP or whatever it morphs into, right? Your podcast primarily, then go ahead, register that, and that will help you own that domain. Steven, you lost a domain recently, and that really kind of sucked because your content now belongs to somebody else.
Yeah, it's not legally supposed to be that way, but if you do let a domain lapse, just so you know, more than likely somebody will snatch it up. My lapse that SP is talking about was completely intentional. I've let several domains over the years just lapse, things that I just have zero intention to keep paying that money for. I had zero intention to do anything with those projects. They went nowhere, so I just let them go. And I will tell you, every single time they have been scooped up by an advertising service. But what SP is referring to is somebody actually took the content that I had on that website. They must have got it from archive.org or something, and they posted it as their own. Legally, like I said, that's not supposed to be the case. They can definitely go in and scoop your domain. They're legally able to do that, and then put it to a bunch of ads, which is usually what they do. So be aware of your expiration date of your domain. But we won't get into any further of this because it is a little bit off subject. But now that you've gone and you've got your website going and you've got yourself set up with some form of hosting service, could be self-hosting, it could be Podbean, it could be Libsyn, it could be any of the other ones we mentioned. What else do you want to do? Well, as we said, discoverability. And one of the best ways that you can do it is to submit yourself to directory services. Now, everybody sits there and they think iTunes is Apple. It's not a directory service. Well, bottom line is iTunes podcast listing. It is a directory service. Yes, it is a much larger directory service than many of them out there. It is one of the world's biggest podcast discoverability way. I can't figure out a word to say that. But
places to find your podcast, right? There's stats out there today that say, this is November 2015. I expect this to change, and I'll get to that in a second. But today, and I think I've mentioned this before, that 70% of podcast listeners use iTunes in some way, shape, or form, whether it's through your iOS device, whether it's iTunes on your computer that you download to an MP3 player, whatever. You're using the iTunes back end to listen to this podcast. Odds are 70% of you are. So you need to submit to iTunes. And how you do that is you have an RSS feed. Usually, if you have Libsyn, they provide it. Podbean, whatever, any of those directory services or media storage hosting services, they provide you with that RSS feed. You just take that RSS feed. It's a URL. It ends in RSS. And then you submit it to the iTunes portal. And then they take anywhere from 20 minutes. I had one podcast that it took 20 minutes. I was bragging about that, wasn't I, Steven?
Yes, you were. And I think we are all very jealous of that. But
because usually it's at least a couple of days or a couple of weeks.
It is.
So that's your number one. So there are actually four main directory services in the fall of 2015 that I would recommend that you submit your podcast to in order to maximize your visibility. And one is iTunes.
I'm just going to interrupt here for a sec because that is absolutely, if you're going to pick one, I'll tell you this now. I am not an iUser by any means. I don't own a Mac. I use an Android phone. I have an iPad that is several years old that sits there and it works as my soundboard. Bottom line, I am not an iOS user. However, it is my top recommendation because it is the biggest podcast directory or biggest way for people to find your podcast. And the easiest way to do it, to find the exact instructions, is search through Google, submit podcast to iTunes. You will go directly to the Apple page that breaks it down step by step.
Yep, it's really easy. You just sign in on your iTunes account or create a new one if you want to do that just specifically for your podcast. I don't care. And then just submit it and you'll be great. So that's number one. The number two one that has been number two for a while in the specifically catering to Android, although you can get it in iOS, is Stitcher. Now, the difference with Stitcher is that they actually control your podcast. So once it goes out there, they have it to do with whatever the terms of service says they can do with it. And that's good and bad. It's good that they're getting the discoverability and visibility into the Android market, but it could be bad if you don't want them using your content no matter how they want to use it as per whatever the terms of services are for that particular time. Now, I do recommend submitting to Stitcher. At this point in time, there's no other huge way to get out to the Android devices. So yes, Stitcher is one of recently they were purchased, and I'm trying to remember the media company that they were purchased by, but they were purchased out in Davros, I believe it was.
Yeah, I don't remember. I honestly don't.
Yeah, and people were like, "How is this going to affect everything?" Well, we haven't seen any changes yet, so that's a good thing. So yeah, Stitcher, go ahead. And then the third one just opened its doors. We actually had a download about it, and it's Google Play, right, Stephen?
It is. And Google Play, the reason we recommend it is because of the potential. Google has very much held off doing podcasting for a long time. And you know that if they have decided to finally go into it, they have something that will likely get some traction. So definitely is something that once again, Google Play. If you search Submit Podcast to Google Play, that'll probably be the best way to figure it out. One thing that I also like to recommend as well is called TuneIn Radio. Now, TuneIn Radio is similar to Stitcher. It also takes the content and hosts itself. And so it is something that essentially you may end up in another situation that they can do whatever they want with that file. Now, the reason we mention this to you is because iTunes is one that really is a directory that it reads your RSS feed and it sends the user back to wherever you're hosting that file. So it could be Libsyn, it could be self-hosting, could be whatever. It sends the user to get the file from there. These other three that we have mentioned, Google Play, which is not up yet, but we do know that it's going to do this, TuneIn Radio, and Stitcher, all when you post a file, they pull the file to their own servers and host it. And so that's something that if you end up having to replace that file, maybe you've made a mistake, it may have the mistake version on those other services.
It absolutely will, actually. And we have gone looking for past podcasts that we've been affiliated with, and we can't find them anywhere because the owner got rid of them or his hard drive crashed or whatever. And we actually found the files that were hosted on those different sites out there. And the problem was we couldn't download the files. So, but they do go out there automatically. They don't change. I think you can request a change if you're the original submitter and say, hey, look, can we delete this one? And can you upload another one? So they can do that on a onesie twosie basis, but you don't want to be doing that every time. So you just got to be cognizant that the original file, not the replaced file that I was talking about earlier that I do on Libsyn sometimes, it's going to be out there. So, you know, what's the old saying? Once it's out on the internet, it's always on the internet.
Exactly. And one thing that, to cycle back to iTunes, one of the reasons that it is a very good thing to do if you're going to choose one is because if you go to betterpodcasting.com, you'll see in the notes for this, we have a whole list of other things that you could potentially submit yourself to. We won't run through them all today, but many of them do pull their information from the iTunes database and the iTunes catalog. So that's something that by submitting yourself to iTunes, you'll end up showing up on these other services. For example, I believe BeyondPod does it as well, because BeyondPod is the Android client that I use, and anything that I've ever seen on iTunes, I've been able to search in BeyondPod and have it show up. So that's something that it's a very, very beneficial thing to submit yourself to iTunes.
And if you are looking for absolutely everywhere to throw your podcasts into, first of all, read the terms of service.
Yes.
Always do that, first of all, because you never know what you want to do with your podcast eventually. Second of all, if you're looking for a complete list of available ones today, Rob Walsh has a wonderful list at podcast411.com. He's been in the business for a very long time, and he's seen hosts come and go, or directories come and go, and just go check out that list. It is a lengthy list, and he puts some funny comments by it too because of their names and stuff like that. So it's kind of hilarious to read through, after you're through that first rush of getting your podcasts out there and everything, and you go back a second, third, fourth time or whatever, and you're like, hey, I wonder what's changed. You start reading some of the, hey, I remember I submitted there and it's gone now, and you laugh and you move on. But yep, that is what I would recommend to do. So that has been a description of hosting, some examples of hosting companies, why it's important to get a website, which we hadn't really talked about before, and what to do with it, which we'll talk more in depth before, and then our main recommendations of directories. So
exactly.
Did I hit it all?
Yes, you did. And as I mentioned, just go to betterpodcasting.com. Hey, look, there we go. We're saying our domain name. And absolutely check out the notes there, because we have a link to some of the ones that we've personally pulled up there, and then also to the link to to podcasting411.com if you don't want to go ahead and type that in. It'll be hyperlinked over there. Ooh, haven't heard that word in a long time. Hyperlink. If you but if you go there and you actually know of a directory that we don't have on our radar, feel free to let us know through any of the methods available at betterpodcasting.com. But I guess that goes ahead and closes up this chapter of our ongoing multi-part segment that we've got going on there. Feature segment? Feature film?
Series.
Feature series.
Feature film series.
Yeah, exactly. But absolutely, we encourage you, if you know of any other services, let us know. And heck, maybe you're using a hosting provider that we didn't mention, and you want to tell us about that, please do so as well. So let's just go ahead, though, and move on to this week's Better Podcasting download, okay?
Awesome. I'm looking forward to this one. All right, so it is the fall of 2015. I believe it was late June, Microsoft said, hey, we're starting out to Windows 10. It's free to everybody that has Windows 7 and Windows 8.1. You can upgrade. And everybody thought, yay! And then a couple of podcasters did, and the drivers completely screwed up. So, the rigs that Steven and I have, there is so much connected via USB, whether it's sound cards, whether it's mixers, microphones, cameras, whatever. You need those drivers to work. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. Or your program. Some of the programs didn't work, like the program that we're using to record this video podcast. What didn't quite play well with Windows 10. So two podcasters that I know of, one is named Stephen John Drew, and another friend of ours, Chris, tried upgrading to Windows 10, and they both failed.
Yeah.
That was a few months ago. Now, as we record this, 1 week ago, Microsoft said, we're going to put out our next big update to Windows 10. Basically, it's their version of a service pack. So they did. And so now we're like, ooh, we're getting ready to try it. Yeah, because, okay, this is why I'm excited about Windows 10, because I'm running Windows 7 home. I got this computer brand new last year, and I was so afraid of 8.1 at the time because I've never used it. I was like, no, I actually paid a little extra to get Windows 7, but I got Windows 7 home, and that means I can use a maximum of 16 gigabytes of memory, which actually should be enough for podcasting, but the motherboard is capable of 32. So guess what I've got? Yeah, another 16 gigabytes of memory waiting to go in there, and Windows 10 will be able to handle it. So I'm ready to do that. But in order to do that, what both Chris and Steven did before is they cloned their hard drive. Yep.
Yeah.
Before they upgrade, they made a backup, and they got ready for the upgrade. So I use Clonezilla. There's a lot of different cloning programs out there. You can do it, but I would recommend that before going forward. And okay, Steven, I got to say one more thing before I turn it over to you.
Okay.
Steven actually knows this. So last night, I was like, ooh, I'm getting ready for this. Yeah, I actually had a computer identified. I have not done any of my stuff. I've got like two two computers in the house that are not running Windows 7. One is running Windows RT. It's my Surface RT tablet, and that is not upgradable. Nope, it's stuck in Surface RT mode forever. And the other was a laptop that had fried the main CPU processor chip, and I got a replacement. I threw it in there. It's actually working. So do I trust it out in the road right now? No, but it's a great test bed right now to update to Windows 10, and I tried to do it last night, and I sent Steven a great picture. Was it?
Yeah, it as he started the install, it actually said, "Sorry, this cannot be updated to Windows 10 because of your BIOS." And the BIOS is something that there is usually limited updates by the manufacturer, and sure enough, for this particular unit, SP could not update it.
Yeah, so I went in, I got the upgraded BIOS. It hasn't tripped the Windows 10 install upgradability, whatever it is, app that runs. And so it's still saying I can't. But according to all the information out there on the web, eventually it'll say you can upgrade. So I'll try it then. But okay, so right now, as of this time in November of 2015, I got to say, be careful. You know, get your backup ready before you go. But I think Steven and I are both ready to make that jump now.
Absolutely. And you might be sitting there going right now, why are you guys telling me about Windows 10 on a podcast? Well, here's the bottom line. SP touched on it. We had issues. Multiple folks, not just on the Gonna Geek network, our acquaintances over there, not just there. A lot of other podcasters have had issues with Windows 10. Even that program we talked about last time, Audacity, has had comments about not being recommended for Windows 10 yet. So my experience was when I have a very complicated machine, as SP mentioned. I have 4 sound cards in there, and that's just the start of it. So when I did
first of all, you don't need that to start out with, by the way.
No, I'm getting somewhere with that point. So that's to help illustrate how complicated my machine is. My experience going to Windows 10, I did the upgrade. I did the clone, which means that I mirrored my hard drive to another hard drive. So before I did the upgrade, I had essentially Windows 8 copied onto 2 different hard drives. Then I decided to go through the upgrade wizard. I will tell you, pretty much all of my hardware showed as working, no driver issues that they came up with, no unknown devices or anything like that. It worked fine. The sound cards worked fine. Where I ran into an issue was this program and this live broadcast system that I've got set up called XSplit. It is something that we were about to do an episode of the GonnaGeek.com podcast where we go live, and all of a sudden, as I got connections in there and got the whole podcast set up, the whole thing started to bog down, way choppy, way too much CPU use. It seems to be some form of driver bug. So to get to the point that I'm getting to, for me, I had no problems with the actual hardware drivers coming up as not existing for Windows 10, but I had problems with functionality of it. And lucky for me, we were in the process of about to go live. I threw in the other drive. 10 minutes later, we were up and going. So that is a very good example. I personally think, I know I'm complimenting my own example, but it is an example of why you really should be careful when you are podcasting, as before you jump the gun and upgrade. It is a situation that you might find yourself having to take a little bit of time off if you run into one of these issues.
So Steven and I are going to try this in the next couple of weeks. I probably won't get to this weekend. I'm going to try a couple other computers in the house first before I do my production rigs. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to start the transition to Windows 10 in the house and just see how this not really service pack upgrade, because they're saying it's not a service pack upgrade, but it really is. It's like TM1, I believe is what they're calling it. But we're going to see how this is working. We're going to try it cloned in our main computers and see how that goes. And then also there's a rollback function. If you haven't cloned your hard drive and you're not working on your podcast main rig or whatever, and the Windows 10 doesn't work for you, that's okay. I think there's a rollback function, right, Steven?
There
that you can roll back. Yeah. So don't worry about it yet. Now, why are we excited to try it now? Because in a few months, it won't be free anymore. So we want to take care of the free software upgrade when we have it. It's supposed to be more efficient. For me, I get to use more memory, and at least on this computer. And so there's a lot of benefits to it. Apparently shareability. I'm excited. I've got an Xbox One. If I have Windows 10 running throughout the house, I can play it on any computer that I've got going throughout the house. So there's just different great things that I'm looking forward to with this. So this is an exciting time, and we're both trepid about it, but we're both going to go through it. And then in a few weeks, maybe around the actual holiday time frame this year, we'll let you know what our experience has been so far.
Absolutely. But bottom line, if you are podcasting and you plan to upgrade to a new version of your operating system, it can just be Windows, you always want to be a little bit cautious. I recommend doing it after, if you're on a weekly cycle, do it the day after you record. Because that's going to give you a larger timeline to get things sorted out before you're going to record next. Because if you're going to record tomorrow and you run into issues, you may end up having to push your recording date or stay up all night fixing your computer. So that's just what we wanted to touch on. And if you have any experience with podcasting in Windows 10, once again, betterpodcasting.com. And let's just go ahead, though, and move on to our final segment of the night, which I know. It is from somebody who went to betterpodcasting.com and found out how to talk to us. Okay, we had a question asked to us on the Twitter sphere, which you can find us at BetterPod. We had Cajun Sean, who is a longtime fan of many of the different podcasts that SP and I do, and he asked a very, very interesting question. He has been listening to our show, I believe, and it is something that, I'm guessing that since he asked us a question, he's listening to our show, but he did have a question about podcasting. I know he's starting to dabble a little bit himself. So SP, what did he have to say?
He asked us basically, hey, what settings on my record software should I use if I'm recording a podcast? And that's a great question because it's something that I struggled with, not knowing anything about recording software when I started. And to a certain extent, it depends on how you're going to record. So we talked about getting a portable recorder before. So that is one way to do it. We're guessing because new podcasters don't like to throw a lot of money into things. We get that. We don't advise it either, is that you're probably going to use something free like Audacity. So we're just going to go ahead and explain what's going on with Audacity, right?
Absolutely. Now, Audacity is something that if you're going to hook up a mic to your computer and then record, Audacity is probably going to, the two main settings that you're probably looking for in Audacity are going to be what is called your sample rate and your bit rate. Now, I'm not going to actually explain to you what those terms are because really you don't need to know what it is in order to podcast. What you need to know is recommended settings in order to podcast. Now, I will tell you the two kind of primary sample rates that you find podcasters use are either 44,100 hertz or 48,000 hertz. Those are the two main sample rates that you usually have for podcasters. And then on the sides of bit rate, the two main ones that you get are 16-bit and 32-bit. I will tell you a lot of hardware recorders use 16-bit. So there are a lot of people out there advocating going to 32-bit. At the end of the day, I encourage you to use some common sense and realize that your file will more than likely be distributed in a compressed MP3, and you don't necessarily need to really worry about how do I get to 32-bit because it can be a lot bigger files. And if you're going a hardware recorder, it can really narrow your options down and make them a little more expensive. Me personally, I do everything in 44,100 sample rate, and I also use 16-bit.
Yep. Now I use a hardware recorder, and so those settings are kind of meaningless. But if I was going to record on Audacity, I would set it to 44.1 kilohertz and 16-bit. And then when you actually use if you're just talking numbers here, if you actually convert to an MP3 file, you can use, what is it, 64-bit or 96-bit? Is it bit or kilobit?
Yeah, that's what that is that's the kilobits per second. So it's a little bit different, but as far as your final mix down goes, yeah, I usually recommend 96 kilobit per second. If you're on a plan of a hosting service that you get limited space, you can save a few megs by going with a 64 kilobit per second bit rate. Now, that's something that those numbers are as you start to dive in, you will find where we've talked about these numbers, and you can go back and compare, because you really don't need to know a heck of a lot about what they're about. But I encourage you not to go below these numbers. I will tell you, I have podcasts with people over the years that I listen to their podcasts, and I will actually be able to pick out when they go below 44,100 sample rates. I have multiple times sent people messages saying, hey, just so you know, I'm pretty sure your sample rate's off. And then I get home and I check on my computer, and sure enough, it is, because it does start to sound significantly worse. And I do mean that, significantly worse, when you drop below those magic numbers. For kilobits per second, same thing. Below 64, you will notice a very rapid degradation in your audio. If you go from 64 to 32, it does not sound very good. That's my opinion. I highly recommend 64 or higher. 96 being the golden ticket, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. Because as you go over 96, I've done the comparisons. Yes, an audiophile or someone with good headphones can probably tell the difference, but you got to remember, where are people listening to your podcast? Probably the car, could be on the bus, could be any other different way. They're probably not sitting in a room facing a wall listening to your podcast, and it's the only sense that they've got active. So it is something that I personally like 96, but 64 works too.
You know, I got a story for you. Actually, there was a time where I went blind in my right eye. So I had eye patches on and everything, and I couldn't see anything. So the only thing I could do was listen. And I actually heard the noise in the podcast that I was listening to. And by the way, I thank those people very much for putting that podcast out. I listened to like 3 or 4 of them as I was going around and couldn't hear anything. But it's just kind of a funny story where you can pick that stuff out. Just yesterday, Stephen knows this, I was listening to a podcast, and I was like, oh, this audio sounds bad. And I was actually going to contact the podcaster and say something about it. You always feel kind of weird about it, because you don't want to like be elitist and say, hey man, your podcast sucked. But I just wanted to have a heads up. Actually, he knew about it at the end of the podcast. He said, yeah, I know, it will be fixed next time. Oh, okay. So the other thing that you have to worry about, though, getting back to the settings in Audacity, is gain levels, right? So what you want to do when you're recording in Audacity, you will see, if you just bring up a normal track, you will see like 5 numbers on the side. You'll see 1.5, 0, and -0.5 and -0.1. And your audio track will be in the middle of that. What you want to do is you want to talk so that your voice is somewhere between 0.5 and 1.0 on the top and the bottom of that. And you don't want to go above 1, because then that's what's called clipping. Below 0.5, and you might have some problems processing the audio afterwards. But that's where you want to get it. And the only way you can do to change that is there's a little gain setting. You'll see a microphone, and there's a little slider there, and it's really sensitive, and it will change the settings on your computer system as well. It's tied there.
Yes.
And so you want to change that to where you're just talking on a normal voice. You maybe you get a little excited like this, or maybe you're kind of like trailing off, and you just want to make sure that that is all audible and all, I want to say legible, but audible is really the word to use. And that you just have to play with that gain setting, right, Stephen?
Exactly. And try to take some time before you record to focus on that, because I will tell you, if you go too quiet and you record it too quiet, when you end up later amplifying it, you will find there's a lot of background noise. On the flip side of it, if you yell really loud and you clip, unrecoverable. Once you've clipped on a recording, you cannot recover that data that has gone above essentially the threshold that's there to record.
Yep. That actually happened to me on a voicemail this week. Many of you are listening to this podcast know of Black Adam, consultant Black Adam on Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. He actually sent in a voicemail to Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. talking about his feedback for this week, and he intentionally clipped. And I saw, as soon as I brought up that waveform, I was like, what the heck? I knew something was coming up. So as I sampled the voicemail before I threw it out there, I was like, oh, that's what he was saying. Now, use some tools. I took out a lot of the clipping noise in there, but it was obviously clipping. Did you have a chance to take a look at that, Stephen?
I did. And that's something that if you are watching on the YouTube outside of things, you will have seen there as SP was talking. I did put it on the screen there. So you will have seen the clipping example that SP did talk about. Now, like I said, definitely pay attention to that before you record. And if you have any questions, I'm going to say it again, betterpodcasting.com. We are always happy to give you some tips and tools and suggestions. And feel free to send us a file. If you do a recording and you go, hey, this sounds a little off, could you tell me if you hear anything? We can dive into it. Maybe we'll see that you're recording it really, really low and there's a lot of background noise, or we might see the opposite. There's a lot of clipping. So we're always happy to help. betterpodcasting.com. But that is going to take us towards the end of episode 4 of Better Podcasting. So as I did say 100,000 times, betterpodcasting.com is where you can find us. Please follow us at BetterPod on Twitter. And until next time, I'm going to leave you with these parting words. Find a place to host your site. That's very, very important. All the other stuff is going to be stuff that will come after the directory services, all that. But you need to find a place to put up your file some way. If you can't do that, I can't download it. So that is very, very important. SP, you got anything?
Just have fun with it. Yeah, we've been talking about, a lot of people will think it's very dry subjects, and granted, it's kind of dry to talk about, but this is exciting to us as we get new actual services or companies out there for stuff like Spreaker. You know, that was kind of new for us, and we're very pleased with the results we're getting. So we like to talk about this stuff, and we hope you're getting some great knowledge out of our experience and knowledge. And go ahead, hit us up again at betterpodcasting.com. And we will love to talk to you about this stuff, because that's what we do all week long. We talk about podcasting.
Absolutely. All right. So for episode 4 of Better Podcasting Podcast, I'm Stephen John Drew.
And I'm Stargate Pioneer.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Better Podcasting. We want to hear from you. You can find all of our contact information at betterpodcasting.com. If you like the show, please consider giving us a 5-star review in iTunes. Thanks for listening, and we will see you again next week.